6:22 a.m., October 14th, 2025, Norfolk, Virginia. 14 NCIS special agents move through the parking structure of Naval Station Norfolk surface. Warfare planning annex, engines off, radio silence. Concrete columns cast long shadows across their tactical vests, 2 agents at each vehicle exit. 2 more at the stairwell to the annex's main floor. The formation had been rehearsed the previous evening in a warehouse in Suffolk. Everyone knew their position. Nobody moved until the radio clicked twice. Estimated damage to national security, $3.4 million. Carrier strike group mine clearance routing through the Strait of Hormuz. 7 people had access. One had been selling it for 11 months. The operation that morning wasn't a raid, it was an arrest. Quiet, deliberate, 4 months in the making. The target was already at his desk. He'd arrived at 5:58 a.m., same coffee from the same machine in the same hallway, same badge swipe, same unremarkable morning. Petty Officer First Class Daniel R. Marsh had no idea the parking structure cameras had been repositioned overnight. What started this investigation wasn't a signal intercept. It wasn't a tip from a foreign liaison. It was a junior analyst at a desk in Bahrain who noticed that Iranian small boats were moving into defensive formation along a corridor that had been changed. A corridor classified at the secret/NOFORN level. A corridor whose updated routing had been distributed to exactly 7 people in planning cell at Norfolk. That analyst's name was Petty Officer Second Class Angela Reyes. She was 26 years old. She had been deployed to Bahrain for 41 days. What she noticed would trigger the most damaging Navy counterintelligence case of the Hormuz crisis. This is how it unfolded. Daniel Marsh enlisted in the Navy in 2009. His record was unremarkable in the specific way that makes counterintelligence officers nervous in retrospect. Not bad enough to flag, not good enough to accelerate. 2 deployments, 1 to the 5th Fleet Operating Area, 1 to the Pacific. Multiple commendations for administrative proficiency. Evaluations that described him as dependable, thorough, detail-oriented. The kind of evaluations written about men who do exactly what is asked of them and nothing more. By 2021, he had been assigned to the Surface Warfare Planning Cell at Naval Station Norfolk. His role: administrative coordination for operational planning documents. He received, logged, organized, and distributed planning files across a secure internal network. He did not write the plans. He did not brief the plans. He held the keys to the room where the plans lived. His personal life during this period: a divorce finalized in March 2022, 2 daughters, ages 8 and 11 at the time, a custody arrangement that gave him weekends, an apartment in Chesapeake, Virginia, a car payment. Credit card debt totaling roughly $34,000 by mid-2023. Nothing unusual for a man at his pay grade and his circumstances. Nothing that would have caught the attention of a clearance review on the standard 5-year cycle. His next scheduled periodic reinvestigation, March 2026. 5 months after his arrest, the contact came first in late 2024. NCIS would later reconstruct the approach through financial records, encrypted message logs recovered from a device Marsh believed he had wiped, and the testimony of a cooperating witness based in Dubai whose identity has not been disclosed in public filings. The approach was methodical. Initial contact was indirect, a connection through a mutual acquaintance Marsh had met during his 5th Fleet deployment, a civilian logistics contractor who had since relocated to the UAE. Contractor did not know, or later claimed not to know, the full nature of what he was facilitating. His role was limited. He made an introduction. The person he introduced Marsh to used a name that NCIS later traced to a cover identity maintained by Iranian intelligence officers operating through commercial front companies registered in Dubai and Ras Al Khaimah. The man Marsh came to know as Farhan was, according to the criminal complaint filed in the Eastern District of Virginia, a procurement officer for a maritime consulting firm registered in the UAE in 2021. The firm's registration documents listed clients in the shipping and insurance sectors. Its actual function, as established by NCIS, was to serve as a cutout, a layer of institutional cover for intelligence collection by operatives linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Core Navy, the IRGC. The IRGC's interest in Strait of Hormuz mine clearance routing was not incidental. The strait handles roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. A carrier strike group transiting the strait follows routing corridors that are pre-planned, distributed to a limited number of personnel, and updated periodically for security. The routing determines where the group travels, where it does not, and implicitly, where its mine avoidance posture is thinnest. If you know the corridor, you know the gap. The initial payment to Marsh was $85,000. Delivered in 3 tranches across 6 weeks, not wire transfers, not cryptocurrency, cash, moved through a Hawala network that ends traced backward from a money service business in Northern Virginia to a chain of intermediaries extending to the UAE. The cash entered Marsh's finances gradually. Deposits into a checking account in amounts below $10,000, spread across multiple weeks. Listed as income from freelance consulting work, Marsh had noted on his personal financial disclosure as advice to maritime logistics companies. He had actually done some of that consulting. Legitimate work, modest fees, properly disclosed. It gave the cover story texture. The first handoff occurred in November 2024, not in person, not via email. Marsh used a method that NCIS counterintelligence specialists described in court filings as a dead drop variant adapted for digital materials. He accessed the planning documents through his authorized credentials, photographed specific pages using a personal device he brought into a controlled space, and uploaded the photographs to a cloud storage account he had created using a prepaid mobile phone purchased with cash at a retail outlet in Virginia Beach. Farhan, or the network Farhan represented, accessed the cloud account from infrastructure NCIS eventually traced through subpoena servers routing through multiple jurisdictions including the Netherlands, Singapore, and ultimately to endpoints consistent with Iranian-linked collection activity. The photographs included sections of mine clearance routing documents associated with a carrier strike group scheduled to transit the Strait of Hormuz in early 2025. Marsh delivered 5 additional packages over the following 6 months. Each followed the same pattern: access through legitimate credentials, personal device, cloud storage, dead drop. Each covered updated or supplementary routing information as the planning cycle evolved. The total volume of material, as cataloged by INS forensic specialists, was approximately 340 pages of planning documentation across 6 separate uploads. The payments continued in parallel. In total, Marsh received $3.4 million, distributed across 3 privacy coin wallets and supplemented by 2 additional cash deliveries through the Hawala network. The privacy coin transactions, conducted in Monero, a cryptocurrency designed to obscure transaction metadata, were eventually partially reconstructed by NCIS working with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and a blockchain analytics contractor. The reconstruction was incomplete. Approximately $1.1 million in cryptocurrency payments could not be fully traced at the time of the criminal complaint. He spent some of it on the visible things. The credit card debt was paid off in February 2025. He purchased a used boat, a 24-foot center console, in March 2025 through Forprive. He increased his car payments. He opened a brokerage account and made modest investments. None of it was dramatic. None of it was the kind of sudden conspicuous consumption that triggers a financial anomaly review. The spending was measured, paced, distributed across a long enough window to look like the gradual financial stabilization of a man who had gotten his life together after a difficult divorce. He was in that specific sense careful. What he could not control was what happened on the other side of the world. Petty Officer 2nd Class Angela Reyes had been assigned to the Maritime Surveillance Cell at NSA Bahrain since September 2025. Her role involved monitoring surface contacts in the Gulf region, cross-referencing AS data with intelligence overlays, and flagging anomalies for reporting up the chain. It was granular technical work. Most of what she flagged was routine. Pattern deviations, contact gaps, timing anomalies that almost always had benign explanations. On October 3, 2025, she was reviewing Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy small boat positioning data near the southern approach to the Strait of Hormuz. The boats, a cluster of 12 Ashura-class fast attack craft, had repositioned overnight into a configuration she recognized as a surveillance formation. They were oriented toward a specific navigational corridor. The corridor matched precisely updated routing documentation that had been distributed within the Norfolk planning cell 11 days earlier. Reyes cross-checked the timing. The updated routing had been distributed on September 22, 2025. The Ashura formation appeared on September 30th, 8 days within the operational window consistent with intelligence being received, assessed, and acted upon. She flagged it, her supervisor reviewed it. By October 5th, the flag had reached NCIS field activity at the Pentagon level. The NCIS investigation that followed moved on 2 tracks simultaneously. The first was analytical, establishing with confidence that the Iranian positioning was actually responsive to the routing update and not coincidental. The second was counterintelligence, identifying which of the 7 individuals with access to the updated routing had been the source. The analytical track resolved first. NCIS worked with the Office of Civil Intelligence and the Defense Intelligence Agency to map historical Iranian small boat positioning against prior routing updates distributed through the same planning cell over the preceding 18 months. The correlation was statistically significant. In 4 of the 6 prior instances where routing had been updated and distributed to the Norfolk cell, Iranian Irgun boat positioning near the strait had shifted within 7 to 14 days. The probability of this occurring by chance was assessed at less than 2%. Someone with access to that cell had been providing routing updates to Iranian intelligence for at least 18 months. The counterintelligence track was more complicated. 7 people had access to the updated routing. All 7 held active secret clearances. All 7 had passed their most recent periodic reinvestigation. None had obvious foreign contacts, unexplained travel, or flagged financial disclosures. The first obstacle arrived immediately. The financial disclosure system had a structural lag. Disclosures were filed annually, but the review process for mid-level enlisted personnel was not always timely. Marsh's most recent disclosure, filed in April 2025, had been accepted without a detailed review. It was sitting in a backlog in the adjudication queue. Pulled all 7 disclosures manually. 4 were reviewed within 48 hours. 3 required additional processing time because of incomplete documentation in the personnel system, a data migration issue from a records modernization project that had partially corrupted file indexes for personnel records updated between January and June 2025. Those 3 files took 9 additional days to reconstruct. Marsh's file was one of them. When NCIS analysts finally reviewed Marsh's financial disclosure alongside his actual banking records, obtained through a court order issued by a federal magistrate on October 12th, the picture assembled quickly. The pattern of deposits below the $10,000 threshold, the debt payoff, the brokerage account, the boat. The gap between his disclosed freelance income and actual deposit amounts was $287,000 over the review period. Not conclusive by itself, but sufficient combined with the statistical analysis and the access determination to obtain a warrant for covert physical and digital surveillance. The warrant was issued October 13, 2025. Surveillance teams were in position by 11 p.m. that night. At this point in the investigation, NCIS knew Marsh was likely the source. What they did not yet know was how he was doing it. They had no direct evidence of the transmission mechanism, no intercepted communications, no foreign contact identified. just financial anomalies and a statistical correlation between his access and Iranian repositioning. To build a prosecutable case, they needed to observe the transmission or find the device. The covert surveillance lasted 14 days. During that period, NCIS technical teams installed monitoring capability on the network infrastructure Marsh accessed, documented his physical movements, and worked with the FBI's cyber division to identify cloud storage accounts potentially linked to prepaid mobile devices. The prepaid phone was identified on October 21st. A combination of cell tower data, device fingerprinting from the cloud service's metadata logs, and a purchase record from a retail outlet in Virginia Beach that retained security footage. The footage showed a man consistent with Marsh's physical description purchasing 2 prepaid mobile devices in cash in September 2024. The cloud account linked to one of those devices contained 340 pages of photographed naval planning documentation. NCIS did not immediately move. Arresting Marsh at that point would have been possible but premature. They wanted to know who he was communicating with. They wanted to map the network beyond the dead drop. They watched the account. On October 27th, Marsh accessed it, not to upload, to delete. He cleared the existing content. Hens had already copied everything, but the deletion attempt told them something. Marsh was doing periodic security hygiene on the account. He was clearing material after it had been accessed from the other end, which meant someone had accessed it and was now done with it. The access log showed the account had been read from a VPN endpoint in Singapore on October 25th. The same VPN provider had been used in 4 of the previous uploads, always routing through the same set of exit nodes. ENS passed this information to Signal's intelligence partners. The endpoint resolved, through a chain of technical collection that the public filings do not fully describe, to infrastructure used by a UAE-based entity consistent with prior Iranian-linked collection platforms. The picture was now complete enough to prosecute. There was one more thing they needed: physical evidence connecting Marsh to the photographs themselves. The cloud account and the deletion activity established his access to the account. But a defense attorney could argue the account had been created and used by someone else who had stolen Marsh's credentials, needed the device. They obtained a warrant for Marsh's apartment on October 28th. The search was conducted while Marsh was at his duty station, monitored by a separate surveillance team. In the apartment, agents located and seized 6 items of evidentiary interest: a prepaid mobile phone in the drawer of a bedside table, a second prepaid phone in a lockbox in the bedroom closet, printed material consistent with financial transaction records for a Monero wallet, a notebook containing a handwritten series of alphanumeric strings later identified as access credentials for the cloud storage account, a USB drive, and a personal laptop. Forensic analysis of the first prepaid phone confirmed it was the device used to photograph the planning documents. The metadata embedded in the photographs matched the device's unique identifier. The photographs had been taken inside a building consistent with the planning annex. The GPS metadata had been stripped, but acoustic analysis of the image files identified ambient building characteristics consistent with HVAC equipment signatures documented maintenance records for that specific facility. The USB drive contained encrypted files. NCIS forensic specialists cracked the encryption within 72 hours. The files included a contact directory for the Monero wallets, a record of received payments totaling $3.4 million, and a series of encrypted text messages exchanged through a messaging application installed on the second prepaid phone. The messages were in English. They were between Marsh and a contact listed only as F. The content was operational: requests for specific document categories, confirmation of deliveries, payment acknowledgements. The messages did not identify F's full name, affiliation, or location, but they were consistent with the communications pattern of the Dubai-based cutout NCIS had been tracking through financial records. What those messages also contained, and this detail appears in the criminal complaint without elaboration, were 2 references to a third party, someone F referred to only by a single initial, someone who, according to F's messages, had confirmed value on 2 of the 6 document packages. That third party was not identified in the criminal complaint as a defendant. The investigation into that person's identity was described as ongoing. The arrest team moved on October 14th at 6:22 a.m. Marsh arrived at his desk at 5:58 a.m. He logged into his workstation. He opened his email. He had no indication from any direction that the 14 agents in the parking structure were there for him. At 6:24 a.m., 2 N special agents entered the planning annex through a secured access point and proceeded to Marsh's workstation. They identified themselves. They informed Marsh he was under arrest. They directed him to stand and step away from the desk. He complied immediately. He said nothing. One witness, a civilian contractor working at an adjacent desk, later told investigators that Marsh looked at his coffee cup before he stood. Just looked at it, then he stood. His hands were cuffed in front. He was walked to a vehicle in the parking structure. The vehicle departed Norfolk Naval Station at 6:31 a.m. Marsh was transported to the Eastern District of Virginia Federal Detention Facility. He was charged that morning with conspiracy to deliver national defense information to a foreign government in violation of 18 U.S.C. 4. The charge carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. He did not enter a plea that day. The prosecution drew on the full weight of the financial reconstruction, the forensic device analysis, the cloud account documentation, and the statistical correlation analysis. The government's case rested on 3 things. Marsh had access, Marsh had the mechanism, and the intelligence delivered to Iranian-linked actors was responsive to that mechanism. If you were watching this investigation from the outside and trying to find the moment where the system nearly failed, it's this: the Financial Disclosure Review backlog. Marsh's file was in a queue. It had been in that queue for months. If a standard adjudicator had reviewed that file on schedule in spring 2025, the anomalies would have surfaced then. The investigation might have begun 6 months earlier. 2 additional document packages might not have been delivered. That backlog existed because the Personnel Records Modernization Project, a Department of Defense initiative to consolidate legacy record systems, had created data migration errors affecting roughly 4,300 personnel files across multiple commands. The error was known. It had been flagged internally in March 2025. A remediation timeline was being developed when Reyes made her observation in Bahrain. Is this a systemic failure or an acceptable operational margin? The question doesn't have a clean answer. The systems involved were functioning as designed. The problem was the gap between design and execution, the specific lag that allowed a file with anomalies to sit unreviewed for months inside a functioning bureaucracy. That gap still exists. The remediation effort was completed in December 2025. According to a DoD statement released alongside budget documentation, the statement noted the correction of 4,300 affected files. It did not specify how many of those files, upon review, had contained financial anomalies warranting further investigation. That number has not been made public. Marsh entered a guilty plea in January 2026 in the Eastern District of Virginia. The plea agreement specified cooperation with the ongoing investigation in exchange for the government's agreement not to seek the maximum sentence. The cooperation terms included full disclosure of every communication with the Dubai-based cutout, every document package delivered, and every detail Marsh possessed about the third party referenced in the encrypted messages. What Marsh knew about that third party, and what NCIS derived from his cooperation has not been disclosed in any public filing. The sentencing hearing was held April 3, 2026. Marsh received 27 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in remarks from the bench, described the harm to national security as, quote, substantial, foreseeable, and irreversible. Farhan, the Dubai-based cutout, was identified in the criminal complaint by a cover name and described as a foreign national not subject to U.S. jurisdiction. The UAE was notified through diplomatic channels. As of the filing date of the criminal complaint, Farhan had not been located. The maritime consulting firm used as his cover was dissolved in November 2025 through a registration process in Ras Al Khaimah. Its principals dispersed. The firm's client records, to the extent they existed in any recoverable form, were not preserved. Angela Reyes was promoted to Petty Officer First Class in February 2026. The citation attached to her promotion does not reference the Marsh investigation. It cites exceptional analytical performance and contributions to maritime domain awareness. The citation is accurate in the way that classified context allows public citations to be accurate without being complete. The planning cell at Norfolk was restructured in November 2025. Access to mine clearance routing documentation was reduced to 4 individuals. The distribution system was redesigned with additional logging and anomaly detection capability. A post-incident review, classified at the secret level, was submitted to the Chief of Naval Operations in December 2025. The carrier strike group scheduled to transit the Strait of Hormuz in early 2025 completed its transit without incident. Whether the routing it used had been modified following identification of the breach, and if so, how many times, has not been disclosed. The mine clearance corridors the Irgun repositioned to monitor in late 2024 and early 2025 are presumably known to Iranian naval intelligence. What they did with that information and whether it shaped any operational planning during the Hormuz crisis period is an open question. The U.S. government has not publicly assessed the full operational impact of the breach. The $1 million in Monero payments that could not be fully reconstructed has not been recovered. It is, for investigative purposes, gone. Monero's cryptographic architecture makes complete transaction tracing technically infeasible with current tools. The third party, the individual referred to in Marsh's encrypted messages only by a single initial, has not been publicly identified. No additional arrests have been announced in connection with the case. That investigation is described as ongoing. What the system found, in this case, was a man who exploited the gap between clearance review cycles and the administrative lag of a modernization backlog. He was caught because a junior analyst half a world away saw formations that didn't match the math. 1 analyst, 1 formation, 8 days. If the Ashura boats had waited 12 days instead of 8, the correlation would have fallen outside the standard analysis window. The flag might not have been raised, or raised later, or assigned a lower confidence level. The 11-month operation might have continued. 41 days into her deployment, Petty Officer Second Class Angela Reyes did her job. She noticed a number that didn't fit. She said something. That was the margin. What do you think? Does a 27-year sentence reflect the actual damage done here? Or does the math not add up when you consider what those corridors may have cost? Comment below. The network that reached into Norfolk was dismantled. The man who fed it is serving 27 years. The cutout who ran him is somewhere U.S. law cannot currently reach. The third party referenced in those encrypted messages is unnamed, unindicted, and unaccounted for. The Strait of Hormuz carries a fifth of the world's oil. It will be transited by carrier strike groups again. The mine clearance corridors will be updated. The planning cell will distribute them to a smaller list of cleared personnel with better logging and better anomaly detection. That is the corrective action. It is the right corrective action. It is also a system that depends at its critical margin on a junior analyst in Bahrain noticing that a boat formation doesn't match the numbers. If you want to follow cases like this one, federal counterintelligence, the mechanics of how these operations are built and broken, subscribe. The next case involves a different kind of breach, a different kind of planning document, and a different answer to the question of who was selling it. The demand that creates these operations still exists. It will create the next one.